Thank you very much, Cian Corla. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the very significant body of work done by Senator Grace O'Sullivan and indeed Deputy Sean Sherlock. And I want to echo the comments the Minister made in the beginning of his speech to acknowledge the work of the Senator and Deputy. I've little doubt, in fact, that if that work hadn't been done, we wouldn't be here today with a piece of legislation that, on the basis of what we've heard so far, is going to pass through the House. And I think that's a very positive thing, and that has to be acknowledged. I also want to acknowledge, and I say this in a constructive way, the very significant shift in the government's position on this issue in the last kind of year and a half. It wasn't that long ago when we were discussing Sean's bill that the position was it wasn't possible to do this under EU law. And I want to thank both the Minister and his officials for what I think has been a very constructive engagement with the committee and the sponsors of the two previous pieces of legislation, because it's a good example of notwithstanding people's initial positions at the start of any dialogue, we can come out actually with a much better position at the end. So I want to put that on the record. It is also important to acknowledge that this is a very small piece of a much bigger problem. And while I appreciate and wasn't expecting secondary microplastics to be contained within this bill, I suppose that's really where the bigger picture is, and single-use plastics more generally. And there is huge resistance across the European Union at an industry level, not to necessarily tackling this smaller end of the problem, important as it is, but tackling the broader issue of single-use plastics in a more definitive way. The industry is spending almost €2 million annually, almost €2 billion annually in its lobbying to try and resist some of the moves in single-use plastics. So while I think we should pass this bill and we should implement it as a matter of urgency, I look forward to working with the Minister and the Government on those broader issues, because ultimately this is only going to take out a very small amount of the damaging substances from our seas and our water streams, and obviously that has to be followed by much more significant action at a later date. And if the Minister, as I said, the committee takes the same approach to those issues as he has taken to this, he'll certainly have the support of our party. We are fully supporting the bill. Although I do have a few questions, and we may come back to those at committee as well, so I'm not going to spend too long in detaining other members. What I would say, however, is I'm still concerned about some of the exemptions, in particular the suntan lotions. I remember at the committee I asked, were the officials aware of any suntan lotions that actually contain microbeads, and they said they weren't. And I do acknowledge what the Minister says, that they did contact the relevant agency. But whether there are suntan lotions that have microbeads or not, the point is they shouldn't. They have no benefit in terms of the valuable role that suntan lotion has in terms of protecting people against skin cancer. So it seems to me it makes no sense whatsoever to allow them to remain in those products. And I would urge the Minister and his officials to re-look at this to see if there's a way of dealing with it. I'm also not clear on the merit of excluding the leave-on or wear-off products, and maybe the Minister can give us a little bit more information about the logic of that, because even if it is not the designer's intention that those products would be washed off, the very fact that the Minister in his own contribution acknowledges that they end up in our sewerage system and ultimately in our water system because of people's misuse of wipes shows that there's a problem. And in fact, those of us, and the Minister knows this as well as I do, but those of us who've had to deal with the very negative impact of wipes on our sewerage system know that there's such a large volume of that particular product going into our water system. If they also have a significant volume of wash-off products with microbeads on it, that is an issue. So certainly I'd like to hear more about that from the Minister, and I'd like him possibly to reconsider that between now committee and report stage. While I appreciate the ongoing work in terms of the revised REACH directive, I just want to put on the record, not that it's relevant to this bill directly, but the 6-year lead-in time once those negotiations and that agreement is concluded. That seems to me, for those elements, something that's far too protracted. And maybe the Minister can clarify, just because it's not in his remarks, subject to this bill passing all stages of the Oireachtas and subject to the completion of the request for the derogation from the Commission, at what point does the impact of this legislation become actionable in terms of a lead-in time? Is there a lead-in time being proposed for industry, etc.? So look, all I want to say is our party supports the bill, and genuinely the comments I made at the start are said in the spirit in which they're intended, which is this is a good example of how things should be done. It would be better if it happened more quickly, and maybe that's the lesson for the next stage, that when we come to whether it's the secondary microplastics or single-use plastics, we can work together at a collective way in a much more coordinated fashion at an early stage. But we are where we are. I think it's a decent enough place, but I would like to hear the Minister to come back both on the exemptions and the lead-in period post the passing of the legislation.